Leslie, this is Leslie Ullman, and I want to welcome you to the Meacham Conversations. And I thought maybe we could start by having you read a poem.
Okay. I've had trouble picking one to start with in a vacuum, but it's not a vacuum because I was having wonderful conversations yesterday with students, brilliant freshmen. And we got to talking about, I discovered as I was speaking to them that I've been looking for some sense of spirituality, probably in my life and in my writing, that's not linked to conventional religion. I am a Northerner, and I have also found conventional religions not to be particularly hospitable to women or applicable in some ways. And so I think without even knowing it for much of my life, I've been looking for something else and finding the actual looking to be sustaining without finding an answer, although I suppose nature is certainly a solace. And I had a wonderful conversation with a student afterwards who's been feeling similar things. So I thought I'd start out with a poem that I wrote that was basically taking off on the first line of someone else's poem. And then I ended up using two lines by two different people and riffing off of them. And this brought me right into my issue that I was just describing. This is called Two. The taste of October on your shoulders distracts me from your reasonable gestures of seduction. I have in my throat one word, but I don't know the sound of it, only that it feels like breath along my cheek, or a hand over mine. You might think your kiss and a few endearments have softened me. It's the word I don't know to which I seem to surrender. I find myself on a strange path that involves my hands and, yes, your skin, which becomes landscape for the search. A word surrounded by phantom sounds, dunes beneath my palms, a string of syllables with no beginning. Something large in the chest, wings in the solar plexus, goosebumps riding the arms. A warmth like bronze, and then a hint of burning leaves, smoke. Something out there wants to be near the soul that is mine, and it has no name. I have never thought of God with any sense of harbor. Perhaps you haven't either. Now I seem to have woven us into this dance between frost and fire. Perhaps the silence that holds me at bay from what I've been told is the divine is the silence that fills my word.
Oh. I can hear in that there's several words that are conditionals, like might, an idea of searching and uncertainty. It's a kind of vocabulary that, I mean, you can feel that in language itself. Are you really conscious of doing that, at least in the revision process?
Yeah, and maybe even if I'm going to be so bold as to make, to offer theories, I seem only comfortable doing it in a speculative voice. Sort of like Columbo, who was bumbling his way to the end of the right clues. And I find it hard sometimes to speak with assertion, but I can feel very assertive when I'm allowing myself to speculate.
Yeah, wow. You know, what's another thing that's interesting in that, and that's a new poem, is that when I was going back over the last several days over the work from the first book, I noticed in the first book you have a lot of sentences that are really short. They're precise, they're like little pokes at things. And then as your career goes on, the sentences get a little bit larger and more inclusive. And I'm wondering whether you're aware of that, or I guess I just want you to respond to it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I like those short sentences. Maybe I think I am attracted to momentum. I think when I'm composing and I'm trying to find language that's going to surprise me and find connections that are going to surprise me, I think in the composing process, maybe I let them go just to see how much will not creep in, kind of jump in. And then when I'm revising, I'm probably clipping them back a little, but not as much as I used to. I wasn't really aware of that, but I can sort of talk about how I feel when I'm writing them.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe I'm trying to give myself an arena in which as much as possible will come in.
Well, you've always had a kind of inclusiveness, I think, in the poems, and even back here in this book, in your poem, and I need to put on my glasses to do this. In Tonight the Moon, you say, I'm thinking this is how we carry sadness, and then not some millstone shaped like the heart, not a bruise the size of a continent, but a residue, a heat from others' hearts, riding the air, all the breath around us, mixed with diesel, pollen, charcoal, haze, whatever makes us sneeze all year round. And that little catalog of things is so inclusive and so various, and yet they all fit together. So I think that you've always had that sense of inclusiveness. And I remember when you were doing those poems, some of them had to do with minerals or rocks way back, and you would just start with one thing, and all of a sudden it was its own little universe.
Well, isn't that how we write our poems? I mean, we really are creating a universe each time.
Yeah. Wow. Well, universe is, you travel a lot too. Have you found that writing influences your ideas about where you've been, or the places you've been influence your poems?
Yeah, I've been trying to think about that, because I do love to travel, and I find that when I travel, I don't do much writing. I keep thinking I'll keep a journal, and then that falls apart. You know, I find grocery lists in there. But I think what travel has done to my sensibility, it's what travel has done to my sensibilities more than my intellect, I think. And I would like it to be otherwise in a way. I think I love the involvement you have with Eastern Europe, and how much it's shaped so much of the way you read and the way you think. I think for me, being in foreign places just makes me that more alert to my surroundings, and it's alertness, an alertness that it has helped me cultivate that alertness, so I can bring it home and then really take in where I am. I'm very attuned to my surroundings. I probably don't fall into the danger of taking my surroundings for granted as much as I used to be, and many people may be. And so I think travel has probably helped me with that. Because place just fascinates me, and the flavor of life, and looking into people's windows at night and trying to imagine what the atmosphere is like in their houses, and what it's like to go back there at the end of the day. And my mind goes into places like that. I suppose we call that voyeurism. And travel is certainly, I want to be voyeuristic when I'm traveling, because I feel unmoored, and I want to be moored again. I want to be moored in that place. I want to blend in with the place. So what I'm talking about interior states more than I am about my subject matter. I have written about my travels. It's wonderful to revisit a place by writing about it. I went to India, about 4 years ago, and it just gave me so much to think about, so much, not just color and qualities of light and smells and pace of life, but just textures that stayed in my mind at all levels. And it was really fun to go back in there and revisit them. And I wish I still were doing that, but I wrote a few India poems, and then it was time to do something else.
Yeah, well, you mentioned interior states, and I think one of the students yesterday pointed out that there was a kind of counterpoint between the interior states and the exterior landscapes that you have going on. Yeah. How did you get into writing? I remember you were talking about when you first went to an MFA program, and how I wouldn't say you felt embarrassed about your past, but you didn't want to talk about the work that you had done earlier on Mademoiselle and stuff like that.
Yeah, I had not had a background that that most of the people there had. A lot of them were already teaching. They already had very disheveled lives, and mine was not disheveled, and I really didn't want anyone to know that. I started wanting to write poetry the summer between my junior and senior year in college. This was in the early 60s. And I used to love to go to an underground bookstore in Old Town in Chicago, which is near where I lived. And one day I was in there, and I was just ready to step into a new way of being by reading. And I bought Evergreen magazine, and I bought all this stuff. It was sort of like buying new clothes. Like, I'm going to read these things and my mind's going to be different. And I bought Sylvia Plath's Ariel. I had just heard of her from a brother of a friend of mine. And there was this book, and I bought it. I started reading it, and I couldn't believe what was going on with language. I had read poetry for classes, but I had never read it with the passion of my own, having my own discoveries about it. And her language just bowled me over. It just put me into a mental space I had never been in before. And it made me want to try it. And so I started writing poems that summer, and I would read a little Sylvia Plath, and then I would work on something. And I didn't write anything like what she wrote, but because my mind was stretching into new ways of using language that thrilled me when I was reading her, I sat down and tried to make that happen with what I was writing, and it forced me to think of things I hadn't thought about before. And it was that discovery that I could take myself by surprise that just, it made me high. And I came back to college that fall with about 4 poems tucked away, and it was like being in love. It was like having this thing that I felt I would never lose again, that I would always have this, I would always have access to this, taking myself by surprise, and also be able to read poetry, that reading poetry was going to be my lifeline.
Yeah, that's terrific.
And then I took a poetry workshop, and then the honeymoon started to be over.
But you know, everybody, all the writers I know myself have always had that one experience of, for me it was reading Merwin's The Lice. And it just, you think, how can people do this with language? And so, I mean, I think that's affected the way that we both teach, which is, you know, shoving books in front of students and say, you've got to read this, you've got to read that.
And you know, the other thing that was exciting, and I think we do this in our teaching too, you can understand something without being able to explain why you understand it. Sylvia Plath was in a realm that was very foreign to me, but I understood, I felt emotionally what was going on. If I'd had to write an essay about it, I would have been in trouble.
Yeah.
But you can have that kind of understanding, and you can enjoy it without having to articulate it. And that was, you know, the way we were educated, we weren't ever allowed to discover that. I'm not criticizing our education. It's just, it's hard to teach that.
Yeah.
You have to give people the chance to discover it.
Yeah, exactly.
So then I realized I can do that with my own writing too. I don't have to know in advance everything I'm going to say.
Yeah, I remember my best quotation about teaching is actually from that German philosopher, Martin Heidegger, that a good teacher lets the students learn. He teaches them how to learn. So
Stays out of their way.
okay, well, I want to thank you very much for being with us today. And
I enjoyed it
okay.
tremendously, and you have such wonderful students.
Thank
I
you.
want to take them home.
Well, they had a great time with you too. Okay, thanks.